From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello and welcome to The Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. Let's start today's show with a Chinese poem, 青山遮不住，毕竟东流去, meaning no mountain can stop the surging eastern flow of the mighty river. Of course, I'm quoting the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi here, who's speaking at Friday's press conference to global journalists to stress that despite external pressure, like technological restrictions, China's innovation will keep advancing. How can China go about it? Let me put out my 2 cents. Now, I've just watched Foreign Minister Wang Yi's press conference with global journalists. Impressive to say the least. I mean, his ability to elucidate China's foreign policy, combining power with restraint, principle with flexibility, is all remarkable. And above all, what a steady hand China has been in a world increasingly defined by uncertainty, right? Take Trump's America, for instance, a disruptor of alliances, a breaker of promises, and of course a champion of me, myself, and I at every turn. Against this very backdrop, China's consistency and reliability stand out. Here's how. When the U.S. pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement again, China launched the world's largest carbon market and became the global leader in EV production. When the U.S. abandoned the Iran nuclear deal, China brokered the historic Iran-Saudi Arabia détente, easing decades of tension in the Middle East. And when the United States bans Huawei, TikTok, and potentially DeepSeek too, who knows, China launched this global AI governance initiative emphasizing inclusivity and cooperation. Yet somehow China remains one of the most underappreciated, underrated, and misunderstood countries in the Western world. That's frustrating. I mean, that's upsetting, right? For example, for people like myself, who was born and raised in China, knew that it is China's relentless focus on STEM, its super hardworking labor force, and an enabling government that constantly adapts. All these factors have delivered the biggest economic miracle the world has ever seen. China now leads the world in making not just shoes and clothing anymore, but 5G, AI, and advanced satellite. But what do Western headlines scream? China lies, cheats, and steals, right? And a threat to world peace. That's pathetic. I mean, shame on those reporters, commentators, scholars. Is this the best intellectual capacity Western liberal democracies can muster? Or are these people and their salaries depend on not understanding China in the first place? So if you listen to Wang Yi, you'll see that Chinese diplomacy is a blend of strength, reason, and logic. When asked about Trump's tariffs and America's Indo-Pacific strategy, his response was sharp.
你们从这些年的关税战、贸易战中得到了什么？贸易逆差是扩大了还是缩小了？制造业的竞争力是上升了还是下降了？通膨是好转了还是恶化了？民众的生活是变好了还是变糟了？美方出台所谓印太战略这么多年了，为地区国家做了什么？除了挑起事端、制造分歧，什么都没有。
And China's foreign policy making is rooted in the Chinese culture, which embraces a different type of philosophy than those of the West. That is why one needs to visit China, right? To experience the culture, to feel out its people, which is something very easy to do now, given China's new visa-free policy to much of the world. So, welcome to China. Speaking of different philosophies, here's Chinese Foreign Minister's subtle jab at Winston Churchill's famous line.
西方有句话，没有永远的朋友，只有永远的利益。而在中国看来，朋友应当是永远的，利益应当是共同的。
Now this brings me to the rise of the Global South, a trend that will define the coming years. By 2025, the Global South will account for over 70% of the world's population, over 40% of the world's economy and counting. This is not a revisionist bloc, by the way, challenging Western interests. It is a collective force for stability and growth. Doesn't the West want to work with stable markets and reliable governments? Upcoming SCO summits in China, BRICS in Brazil, and G20 in South Africa could form a new troika of growth engines, coordinating policies and forging consensus. So, in a world of uncertainty, China stands as a steady hand, from brokering peace, driving development, to leading the green revolution. China is redefining global leadership. Now, while addressing broader global challenges, Foreign Minister Wang Yi also laid out China's vision for global cooperation in the year 2025, emphasizing that it will be another critical year with new milestones in China's diplomatic efforts. So, what key diplomatic initiatives can we expect in the year ahead? How will they shape China's global partnerships and influence the international landscape? To break it all down, we're joined by a group of panelists. In Washington, D.C., we have Rina Shah, a geopolitical analyst and commentator. And in Shanghai, China, we have Shen Dingli, professor at the Institute of International Studies at Fudan University. Welcome to both of you. Professor Ding, let me ask you about this. The Chinese foreign minister kept emphasizing the importance of head of state diplomacy, where Chinese President Xi Jinping, of course, visited or conducted 130 diplomatic engagements, big or small, strengthening China's ties with the international community. Wang Yi said that the year 2025 will see even more of that coming up, including the SCO summit in Tianjin, China. China-Asia, Central Asia summit is also expected, so on and so forth. How do you see the role of head of state diplomacy in China, in shaping China's diplomacy and its relations with the rest of the world?
Well, I think head of state is the top level of leadership in a country. And President Xi Jinping has been busy engaging the other head of state in the world. And probably this year he will keep a similar pace. What's the importance of head of state diplomacy? To secure common grounds of cooperation and stability of the bilateral relationship. So it's more important than the diplomacy between foreign minister or prime minister. So it's a head of state to secure a successful summit. So each country engaging together need to prepare well to create a basket of fruits between two countries for cooperation. Therefore, this is the most important level of state diplomacy. And likely China would engage multilateral head of state engagement, as we mentioned, SCO summit in Tianjin this year. And meantime, China would engage in bilateral head of state engagement, most likely with Russia. And to the media report, China-Japan would plan to do high-level, state-level engagement. And probably China, Republic of Korea this year would also engage such a high-level state-of-head diplomacy. Of course, I heard U.S. Incumbent President Donald Trump has expressed his will to be invited and to visit China. I think this gives an opportunity that China-U.S. may engage at the head of state level sometime this year, if not this year, and next year. China-U.S. should definitely not repeat what President Biden used to do. For his entire tenure of 4 years, no mutual visit by either country to the other. So that's not normal. I hope China-U.S. relation would become more normal by preparing well and by achieving a very fruitful head of state summit sometime this year.
Right, talking about China-U.S. relations, let me ask you, Rina, in Washington, D.C., where do you expect China-U.S. relations to go in the year 2025? Of course, the Trump administration is currently apparently making this grand deal globally, focusing on Ukraine, tariffs, and other issues. But eventually, he will have to go about dealing with China. What kind of China policy do you expect Trump administration will forge?
Well, it's no surprise that since 2016, since Trump came to office the first time, there has been a sentiment, perhaps not just within the Republican Party, but really promulgated by Trump himself, is that the U.S. should be anti-China by nature. What we saw happen in that first administration was not so much anti-China policy as much as we heard talk. This time, in this unusual re-entry of Trump's to the White House, we see his administration look different this time because he has so many experts from the private sector. And those experts share the sentiment that we need to keep China at a distance. The United States benefits when the United States sort of takes part not just in a protectionist policies, but in isolationist policies as well. I wouldn't say off the bat that we know exactly. You're sitting just a month and some weeks out since Trump took office. We don't fully know exactly what the treatment will be. But with the threat of tariffs, we have a greater sense that this relationship, the U.S.-China relationship, will not get better anytime in the next few months. It will probably sour when it goes beyond just trade. It will sour when it comes to maybe talk about human rights as well. Let's not forget who Trump has put in as Secretary of State this time. That is former Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who also has some very anti-China sentiments. So I would just say all this to say that it is no surprise how Trump wants to deal with China, but it has fallen greater down the list as he's attacking the United States' role with geopolitical tension that's between, in of course, the Eastern Hemisphere.
But Rina, like you acknowledged, there have been a whole lot of billionaires, people with business backgrounds sitting in the cabinet or advising Trump from behind. Of course, there are establishment figures like Marco Rubio and others in the National Security Committee. Usually, the business people are expected to be more flexible, exerting more pragmatism into this relationship with China. Don't forget Elon Musk's grand factory in Shanghai, the biggest anywhere in the world, and also Zuckerberg, who has a very good relationship with top Chinese leadership. But how do you expect? Of course, there's deep state on the other hand as well. How do you expect all these different dynamics inside the Trump administration, inside the Beltway, playing out when it comes to America's policy vis-a-vis China?
That first administration, there was so much talk of a deep state and what to do about it in terms of how Trump and his allies would dismantle it. This time, we see the dismantling happening in real time of what could be a deep state. Again, this phrase refers to those actors who are unelected bureaucrats who essentially would be the people crafting policies and implementing laws. A lot of these people are very proud public servants, and they've been in their roles for a long time. And what you see Elon Musk doing with this new department, that's even its constitutionality is being challenged on some level here in the courts, the Department of Government Efficiency, which you see Elon Musk doing with that, Doge is essentially really trying to say we will have a unilateral policy from this administration on how we become pro-business, on how we enact policies and implement them that are better for the American people. That all stands at a crossroads in some ways when there are court challenges. So though Elon Musk himself may be more pro-China, it is really at the end of the day up to how much Trump lets him control that aspect of foreign policy, because at the end, what we see happening right now since this administration has taken seat is a real focus on domestic issues, and that is where Elon Musk and this Doge department is really focused at this point in time. So we haven't really fully heard their plans on China.
Yeah. What's interesting is they reported the report saying that there have been disagreements between Marco Rubio and Elon Musk at an internal cabinet meeting, and Trump, of course, played down that report, accusing the reporter of being a troublemaker. Who knows? We don't know. We'll keep an eye on it. Thanks so much, Rina. And let me bring in at this hour Angela Lee, chair of the London School of Economics China Development Forum. Angela, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi positioned China, of course, as a stabilizing force amid all these changes and disruptions the world is seeing right now. China, of course, is talking about win-win. They're talking about building a community of shared future. But there has been skepticism in the West. How can China further shape of course, on the one hand, the international order in the year 2025 and beyond, and also increase trust and strengthen its image and its global influence for the better?
Right. Thank you very much, Guan, for this very relevant question. Well, I'd like to take down this question by several parts. So first of all, let me begin with how China is positioning itself. And we have a lot of historical precedents to back this up. Well, first of all, China, as we all know, has brought up a lot of global initiatives. And as Foreign Minister Wang Yi has rightfully said, over 100 or something countries has been drawn into China's initiatives, such as the Global Security Initiative, Global Development Initiative, and the sheer number, 100 plus countries out of 190 something countries in the entire world, is suggestive of something, right? And China's framework of win-win cooperation and stability and mutual respect. We can look at history to give us some answers. Back in the 1950s, China took a very proactive role in the non-aligned movement, supporting the global South nations and the third country nations, coined by Chairman Mao. And China is also the country that brought up the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence that stresses on non-interference of internal affairs, mutual respect for sovereign position, and really trying to bring a level playing field for all countries, no matter big and small. So I think today, or just yesterday, when Foreign Minister Wang Yi brought up this framework of win-win cooperation, and obviously met with some skepticism in the West, but it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that because China has been endorsing this framework since the very beginning. Now, to answer your question on the skepticism and how China can combat this, I think China has spoken it with actions, walk the walk, talk the talk, or talk the walk. In 2023, 2 years ago, China was the broker of the Saudi and Iran rapprochement, and then China has been bringing up various peace plans for Ukraine, for Gaza, and at the United Nations Security Council, I think just a few days ago, we can see that there are many rounds of voting, etc., etc. But from the first day of the Ukraine crisis, China's stance has not changed. It advocates for peace, peaceful solutions, and negotiations. Unlike some other countries who have been shifting there and there, has been volatile in their position. And so we can see from all of those international actions and peace agreements that China has been steadfast in its approach to this. And I think day by day, I think action speaks more powerfully than words. And obviously, China is walking its talk. And I think the international community will eventually recognize what China is bringing to the world, as you rightfully put there, Guan, a stabilizer for the entire community. And right now, I think the world needs stability, Guan. I think facing with a very volatile U.S. administration, whose President Trump is playing by personality quirks, and a lot of analysts are referring to the Nixon age of Mad Men theory, saying that Trump is playing on a Mad Men theory 2.0. And we know how the Mad Men theory worked with Nixon. He brought up this theory and caused destructions and millions of lives in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, of course. And having this parallel of Trump to Nixon's Mad Men theory, I think it's not just destabilizing to the world order, but it's quite scary. And I think what China is bringing, stability, win-win cooperation, is, I think, pretty soothing in this day and age, in this geopolitical shifting landscape. And I think, there's a lot of skepticism, I think, but China's history is time-tested belief of having a win-win framework of engagement, of negotiations. I think eventually will win the hearts of not just the global South, but countries who are firm believers of rules-based order and UN-centered philosophy of global governance.
Yeah, it's all about winning hearts and minds. Soothing. Soothing is the word. I love that word. Professor Shen, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, of course, talked about the question of Taiwan. He said, the only reference to the Taiwan region, the correct one, recognized by the United Nations, as a matter of fact, is Taiwan province of China. Of course, this is relatively rarely heard of, if never heard of, by the Western mainstream press, but it is a fact, right? Out of the 193 UN member states, 180 plus members do recognize Taiwan as part of China, as recognizing Beijing as the sole legal government. That was a consensus over the past 5-6 decades. How do you understand the foreign minister's remark and stance on this Taiwan question?
Well, I think the fact that Taiwan is a part of China is both historical and legal. Historical, China-U.S. used to work together, to fight together, to beat the Japanese imperialists, to restore Taiwan to be a part of China in 1940s. And as you mentioned, the UN honors the fact that Taiwan is a part of China. Now also in terms of Taiwan's own official paper, Taiwan is a part of China. And that definition of China is broader. China includes mainland and Taiwan, etc. This is unchanged. But recently, the U.S., especially under the leadership of Marco Rubio, he is the new Secretary of State. U.S. State Department's website has made some important change to delete the important statement that the U.S. does not support Taiwan independence. To delete this, that may not mean U.S. supports Taiwan's independence, but the U.S. has withdrawn. U.S. does not support Taiwan independence. This is a very nuanced, but in my personal view, this is very negative development under the Trump 2.0 government. So China need to caution U.S. to remind U.S. don't play the trick, don't play the game. Whatever the U.S. try to implicitly delude to us, to Taiwan, may make no market. So U.S. need to be careful not to play the fire, as eventually U.S. would be burnt if U.S. would push the envelope of the Taiwan question.
Right. I mean, so much has happened in the past, right? The State Department deleted that very sentence, only to have it added back on a few years ago. I mean, many believe that it is a strategy for the U.S. State Department to extract more from the Chinese government. We'll keep an eye on it, of course. Rina, talking about U.S. tariffs and its merit, talk to us about your point of view when it comes to, of course, the tariffs and its impact on U.S. businesses and owners. And also, I'm wondering, where is the American left, the Democrats, when it comes to Trump's actions, just not just against China, but against Canada, against some of his closest allies across the Atlantic in Europe?
Right. To the average American small business owner, I think the burn that could come from these tariffs, particularly on China, hasn't yet been felt. And when it is felt, there will be a great sense of, well, how do we do it better? How do we serve our business with products and components of products that are made in America? Because at the end of the day, that is the doctrine with America first, right? To make America a manufacturing dominant nation again, so that we are not engaging with trade partners to get what feels like the basics, the necessities for very basic American products. At the end of the day, I do believe that there are Americans who are feeling like these tariffs are just a threat from President Trump, that they are a negotiating tactic. But as we approach again the dates, the deadlines that he's enacting to enact these tariffs on our greatest allies, it seems, our neighbor to the north, Canada, it does make one wonder about how successful this administration can be seen in the early days. And there are many American economists who've said, obviously, that tariffs, as we know, are a tax passed on to the consumer. But these American economists have been warning that Trump enacting these tariffs will crash the economy. There are a lot of Democrats also in Washington who believe that that is the very goal of this administration, is to crash the economy and blame it on just the previous president, Biden. Now, where that gets us at the table with China that has been so integral to American business life. Again, talking about components of products themselves. As a trading partner, China has been seen with great favor by previous administrations, particularly Democrats. So in this moment, we're all sitting in this wave of uncertainty because on the one hand, you do believe some who say that this negotiating tactic really does help Trump in the short term, but in the long term hurts the American consumer. So that's a really long way of saying nobody has the answer sitting here today in March of 2025. Until we see the tariffs enacted, we cannot see the deleterious effect of them.
Yeah, there's so many factors at play. Angela, given the very little coordination security-wise when it comes to Ukraine between Washington and Brussels, between the Americans and the Europeans on this very issue. Apparently there has been fragmentation, if you will, when it comes to the closest of alliances across the Atlantic, at least when it comes to dealing with Ukraine. And also the threat of imposing tariffs, something like 25% against European goods. Do you see a growing momentum for Europe to deepen engagement with China?
Guan, I think fragmentation, we'll have to see, but it might be understated, but we'll see. To answer your question about the growing momentum, well, let's break down what Europe, with the EU and the UK is facing nowadays with U.S. basically abandoning European security, as some analysts have been pointing it out. Well, first of all, I think for EU and UK, Europe as a whole, it needs to start treating China not as a competitor, but as an ally. As we said previously, China is a force for stability. It has not been engaged in a war for over 45 years. It's an economic powerhouse. And I think history has showed us that obviously with different administrations within UK governments or European governments, Europe has tend to be more pragmatic when it comes to especially economic cooperation. And I think let's do it on a more theoretical and hypothetical or rational form, because rationally and practically speaking, with the U.S. turning its back on Europe, especially for security commitments, I think it's very pragmatic and rational for European countries to go to China as an alternative ally to counterbalance against the tariffs imposed by Trump, but also the security commitments imposed by Trump. And on the more, on the ground side, EU, I think in 2023 is China has been the EU's largest trading partner after the U.S. And the UK, China is the UK's third largest trading partner. And, take the UK as an example. For the UK to really reach its net zero target by 2050, China is indispensable in this role. And if you go down to the streets in London right now, you can see the cars, BYD, and not just BYD, but the buses are owned by Geely. And we can actually see actual cooperation, and on the ground, things are happening right now. So I think, especially, with now the UK government turning from conservative to Labour, they're having a much more pragmatic approach and realizing that we cannot be over-reliant on the United States, especially in terms of climate and economic cooperation.
Right.
China is an ally, and it is just the right thing to cooperate with China. Right. And I think
Angela,
Europe,
great analysis,
think,
but we're running out of time.
think,
Professor Ding,
China,
thank you so much. Rina, thank you as well. And
Sure.
thank you for watching this episode of The Hub on CGTN. Bye and take care.